shit!
That's so exciting. Oh my god.
It'll be a thing. It'll be a decent Christmas gift.
Yeah, it
It'll
comes
be a
out
good
in
Christmas gift.
October.
Oh,
The
it's a good
question
Halloween
is,
gift.
does it come out in October in Spanish or does it come out in October in English?
Oh no, can you imagine? You only have to. I can imagine you going to Duolingo being like, fuck French, man. I need to learn Spanish like real fast.
I mean, Spanish and French have a lot in common. Like, it probably isn't that difficult to switch.
There are any people who are Spanish or French listening to this, they're like, there will be some people who are probably thinking, is there? And then the other people who are like swearing at us in their language.
It's a joke. It's a joke. I'm sorry.
We're always kidding here at the InkGuild podcast. More than likely, hopefully. I don't know anymore. I don't buy it. Just go to fucking therapy.
If I develop Sims, delete the channel.
Fuck capitalism. We need to start a revolution.
And you know what? I'm gonna say it.
I can't replace a fire alarm on my own. Technically, 25 is technically you.
Sing your morning routine.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild podcast. Tonight is episode 40, featuring Alex.
Hello.
And we are going to be talking about queer coding, which is part 3, I guess, in Alex and I's, I don't want to say dissection, but look at a lot of LGBTQIA plus representation and portrayal in the media. But first, before we get to the main topic, let's do a quick check-in. A lot of you are pretty much familiar with this concept by now, but basically, for me to go first, I haven't been writing as much as I would like. Obviously, my big project is still Xeno, and I've tried doing smaller stuff on the side, but I just ended up not really enjoying it, so scrapped those smaller projects. And aside from that, I have been reading a little bit more, so I'm picking away slowly at Siege and Storm, and kind of reading a few things here and there outside of YA fantasy. But yeah, it's been a pretty slow week outside of the podcasts, really. Alex, how about you?
I've been reading a lot, actually. I've read like 4 books in a week, which is more books than I've read in like 2 years. I've also been I've been doing like some world building stuff, multi-universe, like multiverse world building stuff. I've been trying to come up with names for all my universes. It's slow going, but it's happening. Yeah. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. So that was the check-in. Since it is only just the two of us tonight, it was a fairly quick one. So with that out of the way, let's now get into the main topic for tonight, which is queer coding. Like I had said, it is part 3 of Alex and I's kind of separate episodes outside of, or like dedicated episodes discussing these things. Part 1 technically is heteronormativity, which was from season 2. Part 2 is queerbaiting in season 3, and today is part 3, which is queer coding. But first, for those of you who probably aren't familiar with what queer coding is, I'm going to be citing a definition from sci-fi.com, so the article is called The Strange, Difficult History of Queer Coding, written by Trisha Ennis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but basically, queer coding, much as the name suggests, refers to a process by which characters in a piece of fictional media seem or code queer. This is usually determined by a series of characteristics that are traditionally associated with queerness, such as more effeminate presentations by male characters, or more masculine ones from female characters. These characters seem somehow less than straight, and so we associate those characteristics with queerness, even if their sexual orientation is never a part of their story. So that is just the quick definition of it, or that is a quick definition from someone else. As for our personal definitions, I, to be honest, really didn't understand what queer coding was. Like, I kind of tried putting two and two together, but I kind of shelved it in the back of my head in case, you know, if this was brought up in conversation, I didn't want to be wrong. But more or less, that's kind of what's the definition that I gave is kind of what I was thinking. I just probably wasn't wording it properly, and for the sake of transparency, I don't want to give it now in case I sound really stupid. So
These episodes are about learning.
And yeah, learning to an extent. We are also a comedy podcast, so there are some learning episodes, there are some comedic ones. If you had tuned in a couple days ago, we had a very comedic one, but that's a self plug. Alex, how about you? What have you always thought of queer coding as?
Well, so like queer theory and like the history of queerness and media is something I look a lot into in like my spare time. It's kind of a hobby or like a side interest of mine. And so I've been familiar with the concept for quite a while. But how I would define it is queer coding is like a character being subtextually coded as queer in a piece of media, essentially, if I want to get really, really basic with it.
If that's the basic definition, do you want to maybe elaborate on that a little bit? Because my basic thing was pretty standard. Like, like I said, I didn't really have a good grasp of it. And if I did, then I didn't want to be wrong about it. So I kind of kept it to myself for a while.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that like you need to be familiar with the idea of coding in general in media, because like queer coding isn't the only type of coding in media. It's just one specific type, and so it's very much I don't know what I'm trying to say right now, but it's very much the idea of making a character seem queer, making them seem gay or trans or anything else without explicitly stating it, and sometimes even while explicitly stating the opposite. But it's just a way to it's at its heart, queer coding is very much tied to censorship and ways to get past it. Mm-hmm. Which is something that's important to know. So it tends to be something where if you're not familiar with, queer culture, you might not pick up on it, right. which is important to the history of queer coding, because it's there so that the straight, like homophobic people who don't want that stuff to get out there won't notice queer coded stuff, but it's still a way for that to get out into the world.
Mm-hmm. And would you want to maybe give a quick run through of that if you're familiar with the history of it?
I know a little bit about it. I don't know all the details, but in America specifically, American media, in 1934, there was this thing called the Motion Picture Production Code, or the Hays Code, which was basically this set of rules that Hollywood imposed on itself, where if you wanted to release a movie, it had to apply to these rules. And one of the big things in it is any characters that are considered or basically bad things were not allowed to be portrayed in a good light, essentially. So any characters, you couldn't have a main character, for example, steal a car and have that be portrayed as a good thing, and it can't be done by a good character. Right. Which kind of ties to the history of, if you look at the history of stories, it's very, very common, especially in Western cultures, for, to have the hero of the story has a happy ending and the villain of the story is punished. And so when it comes to the Hays Code, again, this was put in place in 1934 and stayed in place until 1968. which
Oh,
was
God.
which was like, you know, the big boom of when like cinema was being created. And at the time, you know, being gay or being queer in any capacity was considered a sin or like a bad thing to be. And so as a result, under the Hays Code, gay characters could not be portrayed in a positive light, which is why we have tropes now like the gay villain or the bury your gays trope, because if gay characters in media either had to be punished by dying at the end or having like a miserable life, like they couldn't get a happy ending, or they had to be the bad guy. Those were the only ways that gay characters could be portrayed explicitly as gay in media at the time for like nearly 40 years. And so in order to get around that at least a little bit, queer coding kind of started happening. And like, again, queer coding is, I don't want to like say queer coding is good, because it's not always good. Like it's one of those things that's very like, you know, it's very circumstantial, because queer coding is something that also happens in bad ways. You know, like a character would be portrayed as a villain and would have like, you know, like you would have a man with a feminine voice, for example, you know, a very stereotypical gay man who is portrayed as the villain. Which then, because this was like the start of cinema and like the all of the basics, like the basic rules of filmmaking that we still use to this day, were kind of developed during this very early period in the media's existence. Because of that, a lot of those, the ways that like villains are portrayed, the way certain characters are portrayed, have become part of like the film language and carry on to this day, and are still a part of film language, and are still like, you know, a character. It's super common for villains to have like stereotypical queer traits without like being gay, because that's just what, you know, if you've consumed media, that's just how it's been presented to you, is those traits are bad, putting that in quotation marks. So it's just something that's carried on through history, even after the Hays Code was dropped.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring up cinema, because that's probably one of the larger markets that you would probably find this in. Like, obviously, in itself, I'm familiar that queer coding doesn't just extend to cinema, but I can see why because cinema was always more for larger general audiences, that writers would probably want writers that would want gay characters, or maybe not openly gay characters, at like as some kind of like they needed to have some kind of way to be shown on screen without suddenly having the entire project tank, I guess.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah, for sure.
Which in itself, yeah, now that you mention it, and I think as I was doing my own research for tonight, yeah, it seems like it's a very like neutral concept that can be taken between good and bad ways, basically. And when we go into our case studies, we can kind of look into, or we can kind of look at some in particular, but I guess that was just a brief history of it for everyone listening. Because this would be part 3 of our analysis of our, like, I say analysis, but like our conversation on this kind of things within the media. Let's take a second to kind of look back at the previous episodes that we've done and see just where queer coding kind of plays an influence when it comes to heteronormativity and queer baiting.
Well, the connection to queer baiting is really, really pretty clear in my opinion. It's like, you know, I think queer baiting was the next step after queer coding. Like, it kind of followed. And that, you know, there's still people that don't want to see queer media or like the portrayal of queer characters in media. And so queer baiting is, you know, like Supernatural is a good example of having a queer coded character that is not intended to be queer, I guess. Like if you look at Dean Winchester, he makes references to like queer culture constantly throughout the show. But it's something that only a queer audience would pick up on, and like a straight audience, it would just go over their heads completely, which is how they're able to get away with it. And Supernatural is a very, very clear example of queer baiting. Last 3 episodes included in that, where it's this interest in having queer characters portrayed, attracting a queer audience, but never having to commit to it because they don't want to scare off, the non-queer audience, the straight audience in this case.
We've had this conversation, I think. I don't remember if it was either on podcast or if it was just kind of off conversation, but you have mentioned that before. Yeah, how with every audience there are going to be essentially two kinds of viewers. There are going to be ones that are queer and those who aren't queer. And yeah, it's interesting seeing how like writers would need, or writers, directors, and everyone would really need to kind of try to balance that, because at the end of the day, for both of them, like for the writers, business is business, and if people are watching regardless of their views, then that's good for the show. But suddenly if you try to lean too much into one thing, then you're going to be losing the audience, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is they're trying to have the biggest audience possible without isolating anybody. So, and then it's also like Supernatural's an interesting one because it's the kind of show that wants to appeal to like men, like middle-aged men essentially. But its main audience.
Oh, sorry. It's just to add on to that. Like I think initially its audience was, I'd imagine a demographic between like 14 to maybe 25-year-old men. Or like
I'd say even a little bit older than that. Say even a little bit older than that, like 15 to like 30, maybe even older than that. But like, yeah, but like that's the demographic that they want to appeal to, is like young men who are like, oh, monster fighting, cool. But they ended up attracting an audience full of especially queer women, which like, they wanted to keep those people watching the show because that's numbers, but they still wanted to appeal to their original intention, which is like like young men who like watching guys fight monsters. And so Supernatural kind of ended up with this weird balance between the two of them and never really committed to one or the other. Yeah,
I think
Supernatural's a very interesting case study in stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think in relation to queer coding and queer baiting, since we're still on Supernatural, I forget if maybe I'm wrong here, and Alex, you can correct me if I am, but wasn't there this one female cop character played by Kim Rhodes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, she is in there.
I don't know if my memory is serving me correctly, but I felt like she was very queer coded. To an extent. I forget what the character's name is, and again, maybe I'm wrong here, but like it felt like the audience was tapping more into the how she was not traditionally like playing into feminine tropes. She was still a side character, but like she still had a pretty influential role in the story, and physically wise too. She was like, she had her hair short, which was very much not a traditional feminine thing. A lot of traditional portrayal of women in the media have their hair typically long.
Yeah, that's traditional femininity, is long hair.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you say that, actually, because I remember, I haven't watched Supernatural in years, but I remember when she was first introduced, it was like in the episode where her husband died. But she did also have like a like towards the end of the series, around the time I stopped watching, she definitely had an interesting relationship with one of the other women on the show. That I can definitely see her being queer coded or perceived as queer coded in that way. For sure, for sure. Like, she's definitely not a traditionally feminine woman, which, again, you can argue even her not being traditionally feminine queer codes her a little bit, like, just right off the bat, because that's kind of, you know, the perception of queer people is often tied to gender presentation and the breaking away from traditional gender roles.
Right.
So, yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, it's something that I've just kind of observed, right? I'm not sure if I'm reading into it properly, and I think maybe that's the danger when it comes to queer coding, which we can touch on later. But again, while we are still on Supernatural, did you want to touch on the one case study that you think was a very, like, definite queer code for you? Because you mentioned that already.
Well, Dean.
Yeah.
Dean Winchester.
Yeah, well, you can elaborate on him a little bit more now.
Yeah, it's like him and his relationship with Castiel, starting from season 4 when Castiel's first introduced. But like, I think there's even hints about it like before that, but it's definitely after Castiel is introduced that like they play up the relationship between the two characters a lot. Yeah, he's just like and then, God, it's hard to do this without just like quoting other things that I've seen people say about it. But no, I think like pretty much everyone agrees. Pretty much everyone I've seen talk on topics like this about like queer representation in Supernatural has agreed that Dean especially is a very like queer coded character. Just like his relationship with his family, his relationship with other characters, and like again, he constantly throughout the show makes references to queer media or like queer culture, not queer media, queer culture, things that like straight like the cis hets wouldn't pick up, I guess, is how to say it, or like someone who's not familiar with the culture wouldn't pick up on those things.
Yeah, I think like maybe early on when the show was still trying to focus on that demographic that like the 15 to 30-year-old men that you had mentioned, maybe they weren't trying to lean into that a little bit more. But I think like over time, especially once Castiel was introduced, I was starting to notice a shift in Dean's kind of mannerisms and attitude, really. Like he was becoming less of the traditional man in the media and more of a pretty rounded character, I guess, in that sense. Like like he wasn't really leaning into what was traditional for him as a leading man. Especially when Castiel was introduced, because their dynamic, like a lot of cis het people would probably just interpret it as, you know, two friends being friends, but like it's kind of obvious when like it's I can kind of understand why the queer community have kind of read into the relationship a little bit, because they do have a different kind of relationship, like
They have a very intense relationship.
Yeah.
Also,
like,
yeah, I love seeing, like, if you spend any time on Tumblr, you know, Supernatural is still like rampant there, and I just love like scrolling through and just seeing like these long like groups of GIFs of them just staring at each other. Like, there's so many scenes where they just stare at each other. It's so funny out of context.
good on you, Tumblr. Keeping it alive, I see. Can't wait to read some of your guys' takes on the finale. Hopefully there's a good one apparently on it, but let's not think that's Supernatural. I think we'll touch on in a later episode. But yeah, so I think Supernatural is one of the more, like, can I say mainstream shows? Like, because Supernatural was very popular for a long time.
16 years,
yeah.
15 seasons.
Yeah, I think in regards to TV shows too, yeah, it's been one of the biggest for a long time. Certainly, despite its dwindling sometimes in popularity, it maintained a very hardcore fan base, both for the dedicated, both for the dedicated people who were watching in general and for the queer community.
Yeah, it definitely maintained its popularity despite its declining quality in writing over the years.
Mm-hmm. I think.
But yeah, if we wanted to go into heteronormativity too, right?
Yeah. So, did you have some kind of way for that? Because if Supernatural was our tie-in for queer coding and queer baiting, we can find something between.
Yeah, that was just an example. It's definitely not the only one, but that's just the one that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
As for heteronormativity, like the way that relates to queer coding is, I was watching a Rowan Ellis video before this. She has the history of queer baiting. She's a great YouTuber, deals with covers this kind of stuff a lot, and she was talking about in this video how like with the gay villain trope, basically, if you have a very masculine, like traditionally masculine hero, and then you have a queer coded villain, you have like the that kind of puts the traits that the villain has, no matter what they are, very much in opposition to the hero. And so if you have like an effeminate man for your villain and then a masculine man for your hero, and you're supposed to be rooting for the masculine man, and he's very traditionally heteronormative, very traditionally masculine, and then that's going to end up putting down the traits that the villain has because they've been put in opposition to this guy, to the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to put down the idea of, men being feminine and arguably being feminine in general.
Right.
But especially having like feminine men, which again is part of queer culture, is playing with traditional gender roles and, like fucking with them because they're dumb.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it also definitely, if someone is portrayed as a villain and challenges heteronormativity, that puts challenging heteronormativity in a bad light.
Mm-hmm. See, as you were speaking, there was an example that kind of came to my head, and I don't know how, but I can probably try to justify why, and that is the portrayal of Batman and the Joker from the Batman Lego movie, or the Lego Batman movie, however it goes. So I'm gonna take a wild shot in the dark and guess that, Alex, you haven't seen it.
I have not seen it.
Okay, so the basic gist of where I'm getting at is it is a conflict between Batman and the Joker, or at least that's one of the main conflicts within the story. That's, I think, really the external conflict. There is a lot of internal conflict that Batman has to deal with himself, but that's not the focus right now. With Batman, it is very clear through his, despite it being toys, there is still a very there is still a pretty obvious difference between the two of them. Batman is the more, not hyper masculine, but very masculine protagonist, as you said, but the Joker is a lot more noticeably flamboyant, like to the point where his figure is like jumping around the place, and he's very like eccentric, he's very extra basically. And yeah, as you were speaking, that's pretty much what I was thinking of, because there was this really interesting undertone too of like Batman not needing Joker anymore as thing, like not needing Joker anymore, like I said, as some kind I haven't really read properly into the undertone of it, but like it was a really weird undertone looking at it now, considering Batman as this more masculine figure and Joker potentially being queer coded. I don't want to claim that as fact, but like, yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, that's actually really funny because, like I said, I haven't actually seen that, and I'm not super familiar with a lot of like Batman films. Surprisingly, Batman is not one of my interests.
That unsurprisingly.
That was me being sarcastic, Dean.
Oh, shit.
But yeah, no, Batman is not one of my interests. I've seen like maybe 2 Batman films ever. That might be a stretch. If we count Birds of Prey, I can safely say I've seen 2 DC films ever. Wait, 3. I've seen 3, I think. But yes, but like I've actually, when I was like looking at stuff earlier, I saw a lot of people talking about Joker as like a queer-coded villain, which is really interesting to me. Because I've never thought of him that way. But like again, I'm not super familiar with a lot of the properties, but I can like, I mean, he wears makeup that automatically makes him, you know, not traditionally masculine.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think like in some cases it's maybe a little bit more subtle, because in me bringing up the Lego Batman movie, it was very obvious sometimes. Like it was very clear that Joker was more flamboyant and almost more almost more feminine than his counterpart. But in other depictions, I haven't really seen it. Like the more famous depiction was of Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight, and he was not more thing. Like he still wore makeup and had longer hair, as is a pretty common depiction of the Joker lately, but ultimately there weren't many signs, or at least maybe I just haven't watched in a long time, so I couldn't really tell. But I'm just thinking of like, if people have queer coded the Joker, I can probably see it. It makes some degree of sense, especially when you're considering the Lego Batman movie, because again, for me, that was one of the most obvious notices. I completely forgot how to say what I was trying to say, but yeah,
yeah.
it was very obvious at that point.
Yeah, but I mean, again, if Batman's an interesting one too, because he does come across, at least on the surface. Like I said, don't take my word for this, because I'm not a Batman person. But like, you know, on the surface, he's very traditionally masculine. You know, he's got the all black color scheme, and if he has color, it's like blue, which is, you know, a traditionally masculine color. And he's got like the deep brooding voice, and you know, he's always like dark and like tortured by his masculinity and his morality and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the Joker, who, you know, wears bright colors, like, you know, purple would generally be considered a feminine color. Green is a pretty bright color. And those are like his traditional colors, to my knowledge, right? I'm not mixing this up. Yeah. I always make jokes about it, because like purple and green are my favorite colors. So sometimes I look at myself and I'm like, I just look like the Joker right now, but that's fine.
Oh my god.
But like, I do literally, like, when my hair was green, I have this like purple jacket that's like, or purple sweater that I wore a lot. So I always had like the green and purple going on. It's really funny.
Did a friend of yours ever say anything about that?
No, it's an observation I made.
Okay. Fair.
I just think it's kind of funny. And now my hair's purple, so if I ever wore green. But yeah, that's just like, and then again, he has the makeup, and he tends to be like at least slightly more flamboyant compared to Batman. So it's like, I think it's an apt comparison.
Mm-hmm. I think kind of looking into the world of superhero movies too. I don't know. I can't really tell, because I haven't really had a love for these movies as much as a lot of people have compared to this. But like, if you were to imagine Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, it could kind of like, you can maybe see, or I've seen in artwork and fan fiction that people have kind of seen Tony taking on the more feminine role in that relationship, and I can kind of understand why. Like, Steve really does embody like
he's like,
I don't want to say like
all-American guy. That's who he is. That's his character.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, but Alex said better. With Steve, he is a lot, like with Steve, yeah, he is very traditional, I guess. But with Stark, he is a little bit more of an interesting case study. Whether or not he definitely has been queer coded by the community, I can't really say because again, I haven't really spent too much time reading into fan fiction or whatever. But from the few snippets that I've seen from fan art and maybe an occasional story from AO3, yeah, Tony definitely it's his personality as a character from the movies kind of leans more into that. He is a lot more sarcastic. He leans into flirting.
Sarcasm is feminine now.
Sorry, he's not his thing. Like he's not as stout.
Yeah, he's definitely the more charismatic of the two. I'm also just like, why are you talking about Steve and Tony when like Steve and Bucky is right there, and Bucky's obviously gay, and Falcon and the Winter Soldier will not change my mind on that.
I mean, well, the interactions with Sam's sister at the end kind of ruins that dream for some people, but I still believe in. I still think Bucky is very, very is very gay in my head, at least. And I want him to be happy no matter what.
Listen, the MCU are cowards. Bucky Barnes is a gay man.
It's Disney. What do you expect?
Disney are also cowards.
Yeah. Hi, Dean here. Because we don't have any ad breaks yet, we'd like to share a quick story recommendation for all of you to check out, be it from a movie, TV show, video game, anime, or whatever. Full disclosure, we weren't sponsored by anyone to say this. These are just our personal picks that we decided to shout out on the spot. My recommendation, I'm recommending a book that I haven't read yet, but I've been meaning to. It's called Mask of Mirrors. Let me see if I can remember who wrote it. M.A. Carrick, apparently. Like I said, I haven't read it yet, but apparently it is fitting because it's a LGBTQIA plus friendly story. And Alex, if you look at it, the cover art is fucking gorgeous.
Yeah, I just pulled it up. Hello, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm gonna recommend Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Aguirre Sáenz. I probably completely mispronounced his name because I don't speak Spanish at all. But it's a beautiful, beautiful book about like a young boy and his friend Loaded, who basically and he basically like figures out that he's gay throughout the story. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. It's one of my all-time favorites. I'm planning to reread it at some point.
So, with all that being said, let's get back to the episode. Speaking of Disney, let's talk about their villains.
Yes, okay.
I know you've been wanting to for a while, and that's why you pitched this episode.
Is that why I pitched this episode? I don't remember why. No, Disney villains are...
I don't
Disney
remember
villains are like the classic example of queer coding. Like if you're trying to explain queer coding to someone and you need an example, go to Disney villains because these are like the perfect example. So hold on, I need to Google something real fast. Okay, so The Little Mermaid came out in 1989. The Disney animated The Little Mermaid, to be clear, came out in 1989, which is a good 20 years after the Hays Code was done with. Ursula, the character of Ursula, is based on a drag queen named Divine, I believe.
Really?
Yeah, her design is based on a drag queen named Divine. And if you look at pictures of her, you will see it.
I'll do that on my phone right now.
But yeah, so this is an example. Ursula's in the movie is like pretty terrible person. She's the clear villain. You know, she wants to take power. I haven't watched this movie in forever, so I don't even remember what the plot is. But she's like the clear villain of it, and she is very, very queer coded because her design is based on a drag queen. So you have, you know, the classic drag makeup going on.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. This is something like if you look at a lineup of like classic Disney villains, and if you look at like their makeup, like their faces, you're just like, that's just drag makeup. Like it is. If you just look at them.
I bet I'd need to take a closer look, but because Ursula's in my memory, yeah, 100% you're right on that.
Ursula, extremely queer-coded. Jafar's pretty queer-coded. Scar is like super queer-coded, like weirdly queer-coded considering he's a lion. Captain Hook is really queer-coded. Like not all of them, but like almost all of them. Like the traditional ones.
Mm-hmm. I think like could we quickly touch on Scar actually, because that is, I think, probably one of the earlier examples for me, because the stark difference just between him and Mufasa alone was jarring, because Mufasa, like, again, embodies the very traditional viewpoint of a man in the media, so like very stout, very commanding, leadership like. Meanwhile, Scar was like his voice trilled a lot. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but like his voice really, like, how the hell am I trying to describe his voice? But like it was very like sneaky and conniving, but also there was some kind of twinge to it that that for a while kind of like stuck with me. And I think now that we're discussing it, holy shit.
Yeah, Scar is very, very queer-coded. Like again, it's that's what it is. It's like the dramatics, it's the over-the-top flair. A lot of that stuff is like very associated with the queer community. And like, you know, that's something that people love in villains, like is the overdramatic flares and like the eccentric personalities. And like, you know, in Disney movies, it's the villain song. Everyone loves the villain song. Which, like, I mean, yeah, because they rock, but like it's also, when you look at it from like this perspective, you know, like, yeah, the Disney villains are very, very queer coded. So it's just very interesting to me that like we have these queer coding in like children's media, and nowadays if someone even suggests putting a singular queer character in a children's media, people are like, no, think of the children. No, the children. No.
Yeah. I think, like, was there another villain that you wanted to like touch on in terms of queer coding? Because I can think of a protagonist, actually. I can think of several, but I know of one.
Are we gonna do it?
Okay, wait. Let's count it down. So 1, 2, 3, and then we'll say it. If we're right, Gabe owes us money.
No, I meant like not your protagonist. I was asking before we move on to the protagonist, are we gonna do the dreaded one?
You can take it from there then.
Fucking Sherlock. Fucking hate Sherlock.
Okay. Well, that's the dreaded one. We can touch on that after, but let's close off on Disney right now. Because Sherlock, sure. Like you've said, Sherlock, as you've told me, and for everyone listening, you did not want to talk about Sherlock, but I guess if we're going to do that, you need time for it.
Okay, yeah, okay. So say what you're going to say then. We'll move on to that.
Elsa.
Yes. I don't think this one was an intentional one. I don't know if any of them were like intentionally like, I'm going to make this character queer so everyone hates the gay characters. I don't think I think it's just at that point it was so ingrained in film language that was just, you know, what people did. Elsa I also don't think was intentional.
I don't think so either, yeah. And that's why it's an interesting case study, because when I saw Frozen, I did not ever really get the kind of vibe for that. Like, I knew that she was more along for empowering herself and being independent, which is great, but once the trailer for Frozen 2 dropped, that's when perceptions of things kind of changed, and were kind of my earliest kind of, I don't want to say findings because that's just weird, but it's like those little hints that maybe Elsa could be queer. And that's largely because of the community, because people were always like, if she doesn't think, like, if she like, she's kind of gone for so long, and then, or she's kind of gone for so long without some kind of romantic interest, which, to be frank, you don't need romantic interests nowadays in stories.
Okay,
But
but I actually do want to talk about that for a minute because that ties back to what I was talking about earlier with like how traditionally in stories the hero is rewarded and the villain is punished.
well, let me just kind of close off really quick, but
Yeah, sure.
yeah, so basically when Frozen 2's trailer dropped, there was a supposed new character, and a lot of people were kind of like, oh, is she going to be aligned with Elsa somehow? Maybe that's what it was. Or maybe that's what it is. And like, again, I haven't really seen Frozen 2, so I can't confirm.
I
But
have.
do you want to elaborate on that then?
That character that everyone was like, "Oh, is Elsa gonna get a girl?" She's not a character. She's just kind of there.
Oh God.
Like Frozen 2 is not a good movie. It's not like the worst movie I've ever seen, but it's definitely not fantastic.
Is it really? Because like I honest to God remember fucking crying at the trailer because like the music was just so nice and like
The music
effects were
is
so good.
Amazing. Like the character designs all look fantastic. Like Elsa's new like white dress is stunning.
I've seen pictures of that. Yeah, holy shit.
And like the creatures and stuff, like the animals, the elemental spirits, whatever they're called, I don't remember. I watched this movie when it came out in theaters, so but like it all looks visually gorgeous. The story is not there. Like the new characters don't do anything. There's a scene in the middle of the movie where Kristoff sings like a power ballad with Sven. Like I'm still not over that scene. Sorry. It's not relevant to this conversation, but I just had to bring it up because it's the funniest thing I've ever seen in a movie.
Well, shit, I didn't know that.
But yeah, like the new characters that are introduced, like they don't do anything. It's still about Elsa and Anna and Kristoff, sort of. He's also barely in it. It's about Elsa and Anna. But yeah, the new characters are basically irrelevant.
Well, yeah, like I wanted to bring that up because if it were that there were a lot of queer traits with Elsa, and especially if she was confirmed as queer, that would be huge for a lot of people.
It would be huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to go back. Are you done? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So if I want to go back to the happy ending thing, I think a big part of that is, Elsa doesn't find a man. She doesn't, get married at the end of the movie, which is very weird for a Disney princess movie. Like, I don't think there's a single other Disney princess movie that doesn't have like a love story for the main character.
Yeah.
And so Elsa's very much outside of that. And I think that's what gives her like the queer vibes to a lot of people. Because again, if we go back to the idea of heroes getting happy endings and villains being punished, for a long time, a happy ending, and like even still for a lot of people, a happy ending is, finding love and getting married. And in a heteronormative society that we live in, that it means a woman getting married to a man and living happily ever after. And so like the idea, so having Elsa not do that automatically takes her out of heteronormative society's idea of a happy ending for a hero.
Right.
And that immediately, I think, for a lot of people who are familiar with like, film language or just like, storytelling in general, even subconsciously, that for a lot of people, I think will make Elsa come across as not heteronormative.
Yeah, she's not the traditional woman or like she wouldn't be a traditional woman in the media.
Yeah, which I think is a good thing, but it's just interesting that the first time Disney is like, nah, she won't get married. Everyone's just like, oh, gay.
Yeah, it's like it's one thing in and of itself, right? Like certainly certainly finishing off a movie, as you said, where the main woman doesn't run off. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that happening in any other kind of Disney movie either, which is fine in its own right. But yeah, just having Elsa also be queer in that moment, that would also be more significant for a lot of other people. But I think that's just kind of expanding to.
That would be fantastic, but Disney are cowards.
They really are. But yeah, I think that is the more tame examples of queer coding. Let's get to the monster. The dream's over, now the nightmare starts.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about Sherlock?
Yes.
Yes, okay. BBC Sherlock, everyone's least favorite adaptation of the Sherlock Holmes novels. I hope. It better be. It's not good, guys.
I don't know how many times we've shat on that series before, but
I don't know how many times we've done it on the podcast, but we do it all the time outside of the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some insight into how we are, guys. We just don't appreciate anything.
We just made
I'm kidding.
like a 4-hour episode just going on and on about how great Shadow and Bone is.
That's
Dean.
literally said what I was just kidding.
Yeah, but yeah, so Sherlock.
I know I'm stupid, but like, don't take me out of context.
I'm joking. Chill.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. Sherlock.
If anyone listening is not familiar with Sherlock, BBC Sherlock is an adaptation of the Sherlock Holmes novels. When did the first season come out?
God, I don't know. They take like fucking 3 years to produce seasons. I can't do that kind of math right now.
First episode aired in 2010.
Jesus Christ.
They've been doing this for 11 years.
2010.
Yeah. And at the end of, I think in the third episode of the first season, we're introduced to Jim Moriarty. And, you know, like the first time we see him, like interacting with the other characters in the show, he's Molly's new boyfriend. Sherlock takes one look at him and goes, gay. And then, like, is he wrong though? Which pisses me off. But like, Moriarty is such a queer-coded character. He's flamboyant. Like, there's like there's a scene of him breaking into a museum to sit on a throne with like the queen's jewels.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a queen. Get it? Ha 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 ha. Yeah. Can you tell I'm angry already? This was a mistake.
No, clearly I
Oh my
can't. I have no fucking idea.
But yeah, he's an extremely queer-coded villain. The way like he interacts with Sherlock and like his obsession with Sherlock is also very like, it's very much implied that he's like obsessed with Sherlock, and that there's possibly a romantic or sexual thing to that. And like, I think I'm positive we talked about Sherlock in the queerbaiting episode too, because oh my god,
more than likely. I wouldn't put it past us.
And like, I mean, like, when you have someone like Moriarty, and then you look at the way that they treat, you know, their singular canonically gay character on the show, Irene Adler.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry. I remember. I remember
easy
Irene
there.
Adler.
Put your knife down.
Don't tell me what to do, Dean.
Sorry.
Sorry, I need a second to breathe because I remembered Irene Adler and I got really mad again.
Okay, get it all out. This is your moment to like. This is your moment.
We're not talking about Irene Adler though. We're talking about Moriarty.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is a classic example of people using queer coding in a negative way.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because you know it's a quick, easy way to make people go, oh, Moriarty's a bad guy by using, you know, that film language of having a flamboyant man who's like weirdly obsessed with the hero, in this case Sherlock.
Mm-hmm.
Shit hero, but whatever.
Fair enough.
And
Yeah.
like it's that easy connection of like, we need a quick way to establish that he's our villain, so queer code him, and then also the people that like the gay villain trope will also watch it and like this character. Which when I was in high school, middle school, high school, watching this show for the first time, I loved Moriarty. I thought he was great. And then you grow up and realize the show is terrible, and you take a step back and you think about it, and it's really like, that's such a negative portrayal of those characters. Like, Moriarty is a ridiculous character.
Yeah.
Like, and yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like, to cite H Bomber Guy's video, basically he breaks it down in a very complex way, or like in a complex way that like probably we are doing our best to touch on. But like, I remember in interviews, H Bomb brings up the fact that like in interviews, Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss wanted a different portrayal of Moriarty, the apparently posh and very collected villain. And for a villain that like killed Sherlock for a good long while, I don't understand why they decided to make said character the gay villain. Like, because I was in your boat too. Like, when I was first watching the show, I was like, holy shit, this is so cool. Like the production value is pretty nice. The casting of Benedict Cumberbatch was really good. And all this other kinds of praise. But like, taking a step back, Moriarty really is the most jarring decision that they decided to do with it, because I can kind of understand having two very, very posh people at odds with each other could be quite boring, but that all just depends on the writing. And I don't know why they decided to make fucking Moriarty the gay villain. Like I said, it's just stupid.
I mean, like, I'm not someone who's super familiar with other versions of Sherlock. Like, I've never read the original books, and I haven't like seen any other adaptations, I don't think, which I really should do, because they're supposed to be really good.
The Guy Ritchie ones are fun.
Yeah, but like just from what I know about Moriarty in the books, he's like one of the most like beloved villains. He makes it into nearly every adaptation of the books. And part of what people like about him is that he is, he's Sherlock's equal. Like, these are two men with brilliant minds, like trying to outsmart each other at every turn. And like, that's like, I don't see why they needed to queer code Moriarty to change that. Like, I don't know why, like, because the Moriarty in BBC Sherlock does not feel like Sherlock's equal.
No.
He just feels like some dude with a weird obsession with Sherlock for a reason we have no idea why he's obsessed with Sherlock. And also, Sherlock never seems to be able to keep up with him in the BBC version also. But I don't know if that's just because they keep teasing Moriarty in the trailer, so people keep coming back, because he was like the only thing people liked about it by the time they got to season 4.
Oh God, we really need to do a full dissection of Sherlock. Even though,
But then we'd have to rewatch it.
Oh shit! Yeah, never mind. I don't want to put myself through that. But yeah.
So, yeah, if we're talking about like queer coding being used in a good way versus a bad way, I think Moriarty is definitely a very negative example of queer coding, where all it is a quick, easy way to establish a character as a bad person and not do anything, and then drop it.
I agree. It's probably the most, like, it's probably one of the bigger examples, if not the biggest, because everyone really was paying attention to Sherlock for a long time. Like,
Yeah.
especially because of the big names behind it, like Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch. I think, like, their names were made, if not enhanced, by said show. And, like, the production value, all of these things, and the fact that it was on BBC, and Stephen Moffat, who, like, for his credit, produced some pretty decent things. Like, there was a lot of expectation, and then suddenly to have him as the result of that.
Also, the other showrunner, Mark Gatiss, is gay.
Okay, that I didn't know. And what the fuck?
I'm pretty sure he is.
What?
I'm like,
What?
yeah, he's married to a man. Like, he's gay, but you couldn't tell that looking at anything he's ever written because, like, man, that's all of it's homophobic.
What? Oh my god. Yeah, we really need to fucking do a Sherlock episode. It does mean we have to put ourselves through it, but, like, holy shit, maybe we'll find something. But
We can watch it together and suffer together.
I'll happily do that. Let's get Gabe in on it too, so it'll be, you know, he'll occasionally crack jokes while you and I just suffer.
Can watch all. How many episodes are there? 13 episodes.
Yeah, it's like a movie each, but oh god. I can at least enjoy Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman.
I can at least enjoy Martin Freeman.
Okay, well. All right. So,
Listen, I still have respect for Martin Freeman as an actor. I am not a fan of Benedict Cumberbatch.
fair enough. I am, but I understand.
Regardless, that's the Sherlock rant.
And those
I
were
had one more thing I was gonna say,
okay,
which
go
is
ahead.
the other thing about queer coding Moriarty is, it's this. How do I phrase this? It's like, you know, there's always this thing where, you know, if a straight man is hit on by a gay guy, it's considered like really creepy.
Mm-hmm.
And so having Moriarty is like, which I mean, like that's homophobia and heteronormativity and shit. But like, you know, that's like a perception people have is, you know, if you have a straight man who's being hit on by a gay guy, it's considered like really creepy and uncomfortable, which
Right.
like
Yeah.
maybe that's how women feel when you hit on them fuckers. But like by having Moriarty be a queer-coded character who's interested in Sherlock, you know, whether that's like romantically or in like a weird rival sense, there's still that interest between them, and that automatically, I think, for especially a lot of like heterosexual men, automatically makes them go, oh, he's the bad guy that's super uncomfortable and creepy, he needs to like back the fuck off, you know. That's like, and which is just kind of gives this perception of like predatory gay men, which is like a really, really negative stereotype, and it kind of reinforces that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm trying to get at. It reinforces like this negative stereotype that gay men are predatory, which is really harmful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very harmful. Yeah, it's I can't imagine just like what that perspective is like for someone who's a fan of the show and is gay. I would love to have a conversation with that at one point as just interest, I think. But
Okay.
yeah,
But that's the Sherlock rant.
yeah, it's part of it. We may or may not continue with this again because there's a lot to talk about. Like as you guys have probably been listening, Alex had to contain herself when talking about Irene Adler or just mentioning her. So who knows? Season 5, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe season 5 of Sherlock will be out by then.
Oh my god. Oh no, oh my god. Okay, before I get all sad now, let's move on. So yeah, I guess those were our case studies, and really we're kind of reaching the end of the episode. So I guess as a final segment, we'll tie in the last two things that we have in our outline, which were how does queer coding affect the community, and is queer coding inherently a bad thing? And I guess to open up the discussion, to answer the second question first, if it's a bad thing or not, no, but it has this kind of role where it can very much be a bad thing, but it's also something that that can be useful still, I think.
Yeah.
Like,
Here's the thing. I've been thinking about this a lot today. Here's the thing. Queer coding is inherently tied to censorship. Like without censorship, we wouldn't have queer coding. And so, if we lived in an ideal world, we wouldn't have censorship, and therefore we wouldn't need queer coding. We wouldn't need coding of any kind, or okay, that's debatable, never mind. But we wouldn't need queer coding in an ideal world because, every character could just be themselves. They could just, gay characters, trans characters could just exist as themselves in media without having to worry about something being shut down for it or without it, getting backlash for doing so. However, we do not live in an ideal world. And things are getting better in our society. There are shows with queer characters in it nowadays.
Pretty
but
open queer characters too. Yeah, they wouldn't really need the need for coding. It's very obvious that they are queer.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's what we're working towards. But there's a lot of places in the world, and even in our society, there's a lot of we've been mentioning fuck Disney this whole episode. Because of things like that.
That's pretty upfront.
Disney is going to censor that kind of stuff because that's the world we live in. So as long as we have censorship in place, we're going to have queer coding. This is a really random example, but I know in China it's really, really hard. The censorship laws are ridiculous there, and I've been getting a lot into C dramas and stuff and C novels recently. And there's a lot of shows where the main characters are queer coded, and they have to be queer coded because if they're explicitly queer, that show's gonna get shut down and they're not gonna be able to produce it. And so that's an issue in a lot of places in the world where they're not able to explicitly have queer characters, so they have to queer code them if they want any form of representation at all, which is really sad, but that's the world we live in. And I think queer coding characters in a positive way is better than not having any representation at all.
Yeah, it basically serves a purpose regardless of whichever or whoever is really in control of it, I guess. You can use it to better represent, but at the same time there have been people who have kind of taken said thing and have made it bad. And I think in line with censorship, it's certainly up to what the showrunners or what an author can do with queer coding. But I think upon reflection, it's really it's pretty much just shit. I forgot what I was gonna say.
It's also, I think, because queer coding can also be used in a bad way, as we've mentioned. A lot of times it's used as a shorthand for something, for a character is evil because they have these traits which are queer, associated with queer people, and in that way it can be used in a negative way as well. But I think a lot of times people do it without realizing it. It's something that it's just. This is why media criticism skills are important to have. It's important to be able to look at something and look at what is being done and why it's being done. If you want to go into story writing of any kind, whether that's novel writing or screenwriting or writing for shows or whatever, you need to be aware of why things are the way they are. And if something seems like it's like perpetuating negative stereotypes and stuff. That's something you need to be aware of and just like think about and figure out how to change it, I guess.
Yeah, like we can, like, I actually want to touch on, or I actually want to elaborate on that actually, but I think to answer the second question, or the question that was also posed, so how does it affect the community? I think like many within the community would, I obviously can't speak for everybody, but I think many in the community would also kind of view it as a kind of neutral device that's depending on who uses it, is that's up to their discretion. I think like too many, like without too many different examples, like it's still something that, like Alex said, because of censorship we would still need it. And I think many within the community, like many within the LGBTQIA plus community would, it's up really, so once the media goes live, that's when the results, or that's when, the criticisms, or the media criticism is needed, I think. But yeah, what I wanted to also touch on was like how it affects us as authors, and like we've done this before, I think, with both within the heteronormativity and queerbaiting episode, but I think how it affects us as authors in relation to queer coding is that now we are in charge of that device too. Like we have the power to kind of queer code our characters or make them explicitly queer, as personally I've done with my characters. I've said on podcasts before that Porter and Magna have been in a romantic relationship in the past, and with that comes its own kind of burden, I think. But if I were to queer code the relationship or queer code their dynamic in general, it would really be up to how that is received, that the criticism comes in. It's either positive criticism or if it's negative criticism, it's more or less something that just kind of, I guess it's more or less just kind of something that people would need to see play out rather than judge immediately, I think. And that's also answering like if it's inherently a bad thing or not, which to be honest, it isn't. It's more or less just what does someone do with said thing to make it good or bad. Alex, do you have any perspective on that as an author?
Well, okay. This is kind of like a weird tangent almost, but like for me, queer coding is it's very much about the subtext. And I think something I've struggled with as like a writer writing queer characters is like, finding a way to make it clear that my characters are queer without having to like, like if I have like a lesbian, how do I make it clear that she's a lesbian without her like going, oh, girls, because queer culture is more than just being about there's more than aspects to it than just, who you're attracted to or what your gender identity is,
Mm-hmm.
And I think a good way to incorporate queer coding in a positive way in your writing is to like incorporate elements of queer culture into your writing. And then you can have your characters be gay both subtextually and textually, if that makes sense. And so that's something that I've been working on, is finding a way to get the subtext in there as well as the like explicit statements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been working on that too. I like with Porter and Magna, they can be very upfront about it sometimes, but the dynamic really, I think their dynamic really is how that kind, like how they as queer characters best express themselves, because I can say as much as I want that they're queer, but unless I show it, then that's just going to be reflecting bad on me, right? Because suddenly I'm just drawing in a bunch of attention and suddenly there's no backing to it.
Yeah.
Right? Like just because you say a character's queer and suddenly not show that they're queer, like they're actually part of or engaging in queer culture, that's kind of damning.
Yeah, and here's the other thing too, is I think like a lot of our focus in this episode has been about like queer characters, and a lot of times like queer representation in media comes down to relationships. Like, there's like two men in a relationship or two women in a relationship.
Right.
But that's not the whole queer community. Like, how do you represent asexual characters? How do you represent like transgender and non-binary characters? Because those are without having your character explicitly go, I'm asexual in the middle of your story, because when are they going to do that? So in cases like that, I also think when you can't have like two men kiss and be like, see, they're gay. In cases like that, I think queer coding is also really important. You need to know like the ins and outs of like what it is to be asexual, what it is to be transgender, and find ways to incorporate that into your writing without having to explicitly state it for it to be there,
I agree. Yeah, it's pretty much just a reflection on pretty everyday things. Like you don't really go up to you don't really go to new settings and just start announcing that you're, hey, I'm non-binary, or hey, I'm asexual. It more or less like in a lot of situations, it's more or less something that just kind of comes up. Like if you're asking a friend for their pronouns, that's a pretty, that's a way to start conversation, and it's a way to learn about them a little bit more, for one example. But
yeah, and also if you're like writing a non-binary character and you're using they them pronouns, like that's a pretty dead giveaway. But when you're working with like binary trans people, like they're not gonna, like that's not something that you just state, because that's something that's not really anyone's business. So incorporating like explicitly trans characters in stories without them having to be like, I'm trans to every person they meet or whatever, you definitely need the subtext there in order to make that obvious and explicit,
Yeah, and for such a community that is very much underrepresented in the media lately, it's very important how you bring that up, because you can be very direct about it, but in my case, like how is it that you back up what you said? But more or less what it's along the lines of what Alex was saying. It's like it's not just about who they like or how they present as. It is really about just who they are as a person, right? Because I've said this before in a previous podcast or in a previous episode, but queer characters are not solely queer. Like it's not just about who they are interested in romantically. It's about who they are interested in platonically. It's who they hang around with. It's who they it's who they reveal their deepest secrets with. But that's just focusing on the relationship itself. Like as a queer person, there is a lot to each and every single one of us, right?
Yeah.
Be it if you just identify as queer, or if you have some kind of label to use. So if you're bisexual, or if you're gay, if you're lesbian, there is a lot of individual conflict that comes with anything. It's not solely just because you are that. You face a lot of issues that many other people do. And as a writer, or as a director, as a writer, as a producer for any kind of media, you need to remember that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's pretty much it on everything that I had at least lined up for tonight. Were there any other kind of talking points that you wanted to touch on, Alex? Or
no, that was all my talking points as well.
All right, then I guess we can close up for the night, because apparently me saying close up for the night means now we are a sandwich shop in New York. But yeah, so I guess that's it for tonight. So thanks everybody for listening in. You can find all of us at the Ink Guild down below in the description if you're watching on YouTube. If you're on Spotify, or regardless if you are just listening, we are at the Ink Guild on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. Currently we're on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram mostly, but you are still welcome to follow as many of our social channels as you like. We have a Wix site, the inkguild.wixsite.com, where you can find all of our content so far. As you know, you can find our podcast, the shorthand recap series, and a few side projects that we've done outside of these, or outside of those two main ones. We are on Spotify, with all of season 1 being available as you are listening to this, and likely all of season 2, depending on when this video goes up. Ideally next week, because we are recording. What day is it today? We're recording May 12th. And as well, our social media individually is in the description, so you can find me and Alex individually if you want to connect with us personally. But plugging aside, we have our closing segment, and you know what? I don't want to wait for season 5. Alex, go off on Irene Adler right now.
Oh my god. Okay.
If you want. I don't want to pressure you, but if you want.
Okay. No, so again, I'm not like overly familiar with like the original Sherlock properties, but from what I understand, Irene Adler, I can pronounce her name, is like a pretty like proto-feminist character. And she's also she's like one of the first like female, I guess you could sort of call her an antagonist. She's not like a villain, but she's definitely like presented in opposition to Sherlock. She's like a woman who basically just wants her life back, is being threatened by a man with more power than her, and she manages to outsmart Sherlock, which also challenges his perception of how he views women in the original story. The way BBC Sherlock adapts her is as a fucking dominatrix who's also a lesbian.
Who's also somehow also bisexual.
She's not bisexual. She's a lesbian, but Sherlock is the exception to that rule.
What the oh my god. Okay.
That's how it's presented in the show. She's literally says she's explicitly gay, but she would fuck Sherlock.
Oh my
I'm paraphrasing.
Oh my fucking god.
To be clear. And which like there's a lot of issues with how she's adapted from like the feminist side point of view and also the like queer point of view. So basically my point is fuck BBC Sherlock. Irene Adler deserved better.
Yeah. 100%. It was a fucking waste. Like now that I have a very similar hatred for BBC Sherlock as Alex and Gabe do, I can't think of one of my favorite scenes from the show or from that one episode and not look at it the same way anymore. Because I remember in said episode, Sherlock was cracking Irene's phone, and like the music was gorgeous, and they had apparently Benedict had like improv this one line to make it like really dramatic and shit, and that was hands down one of my favorite moments of the entire show. And now that I just have that, it's like
like they took away all of Irene's power too. Like she ends up losing to Sherlock. She's also like a worse person. Like they made her like a bad person, not someone who's just trying to move on with her life. And they also like and then after losing to Sherlock, he saves her from being killed. And then again, yeah, the lesbian who found the one man who would make her straight is such a bad trope. Like,
yeah. Abolish that trope, please. Just stop. Please. There are so many tropes we should do that for season 5. A list of tropes we should abolish.
Let's do it. That sounds like fun.
All right. We'll see you until then. All
good night.
Yeah, we'll see you until then, all 88 of you currently listening, and or possibly more of you, but who knows. If you're listening, subscribe to us on YouTube and on Spotify. But yeah, good night, everybody.
Goodbye.